Hello, everybody. Today, Jasper and I are coming to you from my porch, and we're going to talk about significant figures. So, we're going to talk a lot about Sig Figs this year, and this is your first lesson about Sig Figs. And all I want you guys to get out of this lesson today is to know that sometimes a zero on your number means something. It tells you something about your measurement, and sometimes it doesn't. So, I want you guys to learn the difference between a significant zero and an insignificant zero. So that's the plan for today. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's say I had a number like, for example, I don't know, what do you think, 740. Okay, so you can see there's a zero in this number, 740, and the question is, does that zero actually mean that this measurement was exactly 740, or does it mean that the measurement was somewhere around 740? So if that zero is significant, it means that it's exactly 740. If it's not significant, that means that it's around 740. So today you're going to learn to tell the difference between a significant zero or an insignificant zero, like I said before. Okay, guys, so the very first number I want us to look at here is the one that I have up on the screen, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you'll notice right away there aren't any zeros in this number at all. And that's because you guys need to know rule number one with Sig Figs is that if it's not a zero, all non-zero numbers, like these numbers here, are always significant, no matter what they are. Okay, so in this number we have right here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 significant figures in this number. They're all significant. Okay, so new number, right? This one has some zeros in it, so all of these rules we're going to talk about today are really about the zeros. Okay, that's what you guys need to focus in on. So you can look at these zeros, and the key thing is to look at where the zeros are. You'll notice that the zeros in this number are in front of the first non-zero number. So we call these zeros leading zeros. Okay, they're zeros that are in front of the first sig fig. And the rule is for leading zeros that leading zeros are never significant figures. Never. Okay? So these front zeros over here, all these zeros, all of them and these zeros right here are never significant. Okay? Never. Not ever one time. Period. Okay? So how many sig figs are in this number? Well, none of those zeros are significant. But remember rule number one, if it's not a zero, it's always significant. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 sig figs in this number. The 3, the 4, the 5, and the 7 are all significant, but none of the zeros are. Okay, guys, so here we have a new kind of zero. So the first kind, again, was leading zeros. They were in front of all the numbers. You can see these zeros are different because they're not in the front anymore, right? These zeros are trapped between this 1 over here and this 8 over here. They're in the middle. So we call those sandwich zeros. And the rule for sandwich zeros is that a sandwich zero that's trapped between two other numbers is always significant. Always. Okay? So in this number, all of the digits are significant because if it's not a zero, it's significant. And if it's a sandwich zero, it's always significant. Okay, so here we have some more zeros, and the question is, what kind of zeros are they? Are they significant? Well, they're not leading zeros because they're not in the front, but do they still count as sandwich zeros? Well, yeah, they do. Okay, even though there's a decimal in here, even though they have this decimal in the middle, they're still sandwiched between the 3 and the 8. Okay, so even if there's a decimal in the number, as long as the zeros are sandwiched between two other numbers, they still count as sig figs. They're still significant. Okay, guys, this is the last kind of zero, and you can see it looks different from the other two. These zeros are at the end of the number, so we call them trailing zeros. And they're the tricky ones because trailing zeros are sometimes significant and sometimes not. So how can you tell if a trailing zero means something? How can you tell if it's significant? Well, you check for a decimal, all right? In this number, there is no decimal at the end of the number. There's no decimal point. So what that means is that these last zeros here are just a guess, and so they're not significant. Now, that does not mean they're not important. We can't just get rid of them, but they're not sig figs. So this number only has these 2 sig figs here. These 3 zeros are not significant. Okay? So we wouldn't count them as sig figs. So these trailing zeros do have a decimal point shown. There is a decimal point somewhere in the number. It's right there. all of a sudden, as long as that decimal point is somewhere in the number, that makes these trailing zeros significant, okay? So in this particular number, all of these zeros are significant. The first two are significant because they're not zeros, and then all of these trailing zeros are significant, even the ones that come before the decimal, okay? These are also significant. It doesn't matter if the trailing zeros are before the decimal or after the decimal. All that matters is that there is a decimal point somewhere in the number, okay? As long as there is a decimal point somewhere in the number, every trailing zero in that number is significant. Ooh, now we're getting a little tricky, okay? We have a mixture here of two different kinds of zeros in this number, right? Let's go through and try to figure out how many sig figs there are. So remember, the first rule is if it's not a zero, it's significant. So this one is significant, period, okay? Now we've got some zeros, and the question is, are they significant? Well, what kind of zeros are they? Are they leading zeros? Are they in front of the number? No, right? They're not. Are they trailing zeros? Are they at the end of the number? Well, no again. So if you look, they're between the 1 and the 7, which makes them sandwich zeros. And the rule for sandwich zeros is that they're always significant. So these two zeros are also significant. And so is that 7, because it's not a zero, right? Now these last two zeros, what kind of zeros are they? Well, they're at the end of the number, right? So that makes them trailing zeros. If it's a trailing zero, you have to ask yourself another question, which is it a significant trailing zero? And what tells you that is whether or not there's a decimal point there. So there is a decimal in this number right there. I just covered it up, but it's right there. And because that decimal point is in the number, those trailing zeros are significant. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sig figs in this particular number. All of them are significant. All right, so one more of these. All the things that aren't zeros are always significant, so those are easy. So this 1 is significant. What about that 0? What kind of 0 is it? Always ask yourself that first. Well, this 0 is trapped between the 1 and the 4. It's sandwiched between the 1 and the 4. And sandwiched zeros are always significant. So this 0 is also significant. The 4 is significant because it's not a 0. That's easy. Then we have another 0 here. So what kind of 0 is it? It's either a leading 0, a sandwiched 0, or a trailing 0. This is clearly a trailing 0, right? Trailing zeros are significant if a decimal point is shown anywhere in the number. So this 0 is significant because there's a decimal point at the end of the number. That decimal point tells us that that 0 means something. It means this measurement was exactly 1,040. Not just a little bit above or a little bit below, but exactly 1,040. That 0 is a significant 0. Alright guys, this is the last one, so I moved to the middle of the screen because it's important. I want to count the sig figs in this number. So let's start from the left side and work our way over to the right. So this first 0 over here, see if I can put my finger on top of it. Oh, over there. That's in front of all the other numbers. And so if it's in front of all the other numbers, what kind of 0 is it? In this case, it's a leading 0, right? Leading zeros are never significant. So this 0 and this one are not significant. Now guys, I'm just crossing through them to show you they're not significant. You never take them out of the number, okay? They still mean something, they're just not sig figs. So the 7 is significant because it's not a 0. Now look at these two zeros here. What kind of zeros are they? Right, they're trapped between two numbers. And so that makes them sandwich zeros. And the rule is sandwich zeros are always significant. Okay, so that's significant, that's significant. The 4 and the 3 are significant because they're not zeros. And then at the end of the number, we have a new kind of 0, the last kind, which is a trailing 0 at the end of the number. When is a trailing 0 significant? It's when there's a decimal point anywhere in the number. So there is a decimal point way up here at the front, okay, all the way up there, and that decimal point way up at the front makes that 0 at the end, the trailing 0, a significant figure. So this is also significant. So that means we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sig figs in this number. Okay guys, so in summary, the rules for identifying a sig fig: if it's not a 0, it's significant, period, always. If it's a leading 0, it never counts as a sig fig. If it's sandwiched, it's always a sig fig. And finally, if it's trailing, it's significant if there is a decimal somewhere in the number. Okay, those are your 4 rules. Learn them, love them. You're going to use them all year long, and good luck on the practice.